Welcome to the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randle and Gus Kearns.
This podcast has been more entrenched with Virginia basketball than any other podcast out there. We've been talking about Shoot the Ball London with London Parentis. We've been talking about down screen, back screen, the beauty of the Tony Bennett system, both offensively and defensively. How people across the country just don't appreciate the Cavaliers' style of basketball. And that it may not be high flying, unless you're Jay Huff. It may not be fast break, but it's exquisite and so detail oriented that it is up there with one of the most beautiful forms of basketball of all time. Everything isn't done at Mach speed. And what Tony Bennett has done with Virginia year after year, ACC titles, Final Four, national championship, is unbelievable because he recruits to a system and the system wins. And even 2 years ago, when Virginia became, yes, the first 1 seed ever to lose to a 16 seed in UMBC, and Jarius Lyles lighting them up with the scoop shots for the layups, we talked about how this needed to be the Tony Bennett Redemption Tour the year after. We called a podcast, Gus and I, the Tony Bennett Redemption Tour. Look it up. And then sure enough, after a fantastic season, after losing to UMBC, with no DeAndre Hunter, by the way, which is always forgotten about, a huge missing piece of that team. Not really 1 seed without him, probably not a 2 seed. They come back and enter the tournament. And Gus and I were down at the Meadowlands Sportsbook with our good friend Dr. Tony, and we were watching Virginia versus Gardner-Webb in the first round. Do you know that game got to 30-16? Gardner-Webb was up 14 points. 1 year after Virginia had lost to the 1 seed, they come back as a 1 seed, and Gardner-Webb's up 14 points. But from that point and that comeback, you just had a feeling that things were going to change. Then they move into the Elite Eight, which has been a stumbling block. They've had trouble. They lost to Syracuse, the ghost of Malachi Richardson. And they come back against Purdue with the Diakite tap back off the Jerome miss. Kihei Clark, nervous, looking for someone, anyone. Kyle Guy calling for the ball on the bottom of the screen, ignoring him. He fires up to Diakite, who's smart enough not to bring the ball down to keep it high, puts the basket in, ties Purdue in the Elite Eight. Virginia goes on. And then the Final Four against Auburn. What an incredible game it was. Virginia in control, up 10. 4.5 minutes left. Ty Jerome, 4th foul. Silly foul. Missed a basket, a turnaround basket. He backed Jared Harper down. Turnaround basket. Got a foul. Annoyed. He comes out. Auburn goes on a run. Bryce Brown hitting threes after threes. Here comes Virginia. Down 2. Inbounds play. Auburn's going to beat him. They're going to fall short again. Kyle Guy gets the ball in the corner, and he's fouled. And he was fouled. Goes to the line. Shooting 3 free throws. Down 2, and you knew it. Just like he made the 2 free throws, not even hitting the rim in the Elite Eight overtime game, up 1 against Purdue. Kyle Guy bangs all 3 free throws, sending the Virginia Cavaliers to the final game against Texas Tech, where they beat the Red Raiders and secure the national title. But that was all heading into this year. People didn't know what to expect this year. Preseason poll had them 4th. Some services had them 5th. They lost so much. They lost Ty Jerome. They lost DeAndre Hunter. They lost Kyle Guy. 3 NBA players on a Virginia team that really doesn't recruit a ton of 5-star guys. Everyone expected them to be down. But they weren't down. They started off slow, and then they got it together, and then they got on fire, and then they beat Duke. And Tony Bennett had this team rolling again. As much as people want to hate on them and say it's not sexy, they win. And they win every year. So when we look back on the season and continue our Screen the Screener season recap series, we need to bring somebody in to talk about Who's Nation. And who better to bring in than MikeBarber of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Mike is a beat writer for UVA. He's a fantastic follow on Twitter at RTD_MikeBarber. Mike has joined us before on the team preview series to start the year, and now he's coming back to recap the Cavalier season and to talk about next year with some big-time recruits coming in. Just how dominant can Tony Bennett be with this Cavalier team yet again? Jay Huff, how great is he? Who doesn't love Jay Huff? How they'll be back, they'll be in contention again, doing it their way, their system, defense, slow tempo, and incredible execution. So the Screen the Screener season review series is moving forward, and we have Mike Barber from the Richmond Times-Dispatch on the pod to talk about the Virginia Cavaliers. Let's listen in. The Screen the Screener team recap series continues today with the Virginia Cavaliers, the defending national champions, and we have one of the best in the business in Mike Barber joining us today from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Please follow him on Twitter at RTD_Mike Barber. He's going to recap the season and give us some insight into next year for your Virginia Cavaliers. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Hope you're staying safe down there.
Yeah, so far so good, and thanks for having me. It'll be fun to talk a little basketball.
Absolutely. And listen, full disclosure, Mike, here on the podcast, when Virginia lost 2 years ago to UMBC, my partner and I felt it was one of the most blown out of proportion losses that's happened in the tournament. I mean, there's really not a big difference between a 1 losing to a 16 and a 2 losing to a 15. Virginia didn't have DeAndre Hunter, the whole thing. So we built up this idea of the Tony Bennett redemption tour. Like he needs redemption, he certainly doesn't. But last night, I have to tell you, with my wife, I'm sitting there and I'm watching the Auburn-Virginia game again, which came up on TV. And what an incredible game that was. Just talk a little bit about that experience and then how coming into this season, after losing so many players, Cavaliers, they had the national title, lost a lot. But I think with Tony Bennett, you always know the Cavaliers are going to be really, really solid.
Yeah, it was such a special run, the one to the national title, and it really was made special because of the year before and the UMBC loss. And anytime you win a national championship, it's a big moment, obviously, but they really did go from the lowest of lows in sports terms, that lost to a 16, and not just, they were a juggernaut that year. They were the team that people thought had the best chance to win the national title. And then they went out in the first round, and it wasn't fluky, and it wasn't close, and they didn't lose on a half-court heave at the buzzer. They got beaten. And I think that there was this sense of what would be a more perfect story than, and really, I think when people bandied it around, they said, what would be a more perfect story than reaching the Final Four the year after that happened? Then going and winning it all certainly only adds to the story. And as you were watching, those games were classics. Those games were amazing. Every one of them. Certainly when you think about the Elite Eight game and Purdue and the fact that the season's essentially over before Mamadi Diakite gets that miracle jumper off of a missed free throw, a backcourt tap, and a pass ahead. So there was an element to that story that I don't know that we've seen from another championship. And again, every championship is special. Everyone has its own story, an athlete who came back, somebody who was injured, whatever it is. But to see that team lose in the first round and sort of be the center of national ridicule, really, and then come back. Yeah, redemption tour is a perfect way to describe it. They would probably, or at least Tony would not use that term because he always says every year is its own year. But if you were on the outside looking in, you had to feel good for that group.
So we head into this season, and preseason poll tabbed them as fourth in the conference. People thought there'd be a little decrease, but they're always going to play tough. And then sure enough, they finished tied for second, just 1 game behind Florida State, and really were playing their best basketball here. They were on an 8-game winning streak when the season ended. Just an incredible run. They beat Duke at home 52-50. In the middle of the season, they had the 3 consecutive losses to BC, Syracuse, and Florida State. How did the feeling change? Of course, you come in, you start with the non-conference. They lose to Purdue, big loss away. That's all right, tough place to play. Purdue gets hot from 3. But after those 3 losses, did you sense, or did the fans sense that maybe this could turn around? Or were you saying, listen, we had a national title, we're sort of in rebuild mode, we'll see what happens? Really, it was, I guess it was 11 out of 12, if you want to say that, the last 12 games.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I kind of wrote this team off preseason. I thought the preseason projections were too high. I know the ACC was down this year, but I just didn't think they had the pieces to end up where they ended up. And the funny thing about it is, if you want to pick a moment where, at least for me, I said, hey, this team might be okay, it's actually the game they lost, February 8th, I want to say, at Louisville.
Yep.
They lost 80-73, but they came storming back in that game. Thomas Wolde-Tensai, the junior college transfer Italian kid, he got really hot from three. They finally showed some life offensively. I mean, it was maybe their worst defensive game. It was a game they lost by 7. But to me, it was the moment that I said, hey, the things that I thought this group couldn't do, maybe they can do. Maybe they can score enough points to win. Maybe they can find some outside shooting to open up the rest of the offense and the rest of what they want to do. So, and then from that point, certainly they were great. And you mentioned the win streak, and 8 at the end, and 7 of them were by a single shot, right? 3 points or less. And so you get a little bit of that magic back and that poise. And I really thought this team would have a chance. Now, I don't know that they were a Final Four team, but the way they were playing at the end, I thought this could be another Sweet 16 Elite 8 team. And I'll tell you, going into the year, I did not think that.
Yeah, Wolde-Tensai, 7 of 10 from three-point range in that game. Kihei Clark had 23 points as well. That was a great one. That's absolutely a turning point. And look, this team with Tony always ends up playing its best basketball at the end of the year. The end of the year awards, it's just a tribute to this program. Diakite was second team All-ACC. Kihei Clark was third team. You had Braxton Key on honorable mention. Really, the roles did sort of evolve as the year went on, and Kihei Clark was so valuable 2 years ago with the championship as well. I remember he had the broken hand, right? Came back from that. So who were the players that really stood out this year that improved? Of course, Mike, full disclosure, love J. Huff dunks and blocks. I mean, I put them on Twitter as much as humanly possible. I mean, there are no easy ones for him. Everything he does is like a Sports Center dunk. But who are the key players that really developed this year that got them to the point at the end of the year where they were pretty much a dangerous team? No one wants to face the defending national champion, Virginia, with their style and how they force their will on the game.
Yeah, Jay obviously is a ton of fun, and we always joke that nobody has more productive 7 or 8 minute stretches than Jay Huff.
Yes.
If he can find a way to prolong that next season, that'll really be something. But to me, it was all about Kihei Clark, and when I say all about, Mamadi Diakite was the leading scorer. He was their most consistent. He had a ton of big shots, but Kihei Clark, more than anybody on this team, was really asked to play a different role, and I think people don't understand that because he was a point guard last year. He played a ton of minutes last year. He was on the floor at key spots last year. But his job a year ago was to get the ball up the floor and get it into the hands of the big three, right? Ty Jerome was making a lot of the big passes. Kyle Guy was making a lot of big passes. Guy, Jerome, Hunter, they were taking those shots. And this year it was bring the ball up, and now that you're up with the ball, figure out what we're going to do with it. Figure out where it's going to go. Figure out how you're going to get points. And I thought Kihei Clark's role changed the most dramatically, and I thought it was the most underappreciated on the team. I think people just thought he was the point guard last year. He's the point guard this year. Why is he turning it over more? Or why is this? Or why is that? And they weren't looking at the fact that he was still being asked to be the really pesty, nasty, aggressive on-the-ball defender that really gets the defense started when they're in a half-court defense. But offensively, he had a ton more responsibility, and I thought it was him getting more and more comfortable in that role that really was the biggest reason they were able to get going down the stretch and, like you said, become a team that nobody wanted to play in the postseason.
You know, we look to next year, and Virginia is going to be a major, major issue yet again. You have some big players coming in. Of course, we're going to look at Sam Hauser, who's going to be eligible, who I remember reading some stories about. He really did a nice job in practice, right? Preparing against Syracuse, things like that. You know, as he sat out, right, he really had a pretty big impact on this team, and he's someone you're looking forward to next year, right?
Yeah, and we had a chance to talk to Sam, I'm trying to remember, right before the team left for the ACC tournament and talk to his teammates about what he brought, exactly to your point, in practice. And, you know, that's the thing in college basketball. One of the things that fuels the great programs, Duke, Kentucky, those kind of Kansas, those programs is, yeah, they got great players. They got great guys they put on the floor, but they've got guys behind them who are really good. So when they go to practice, they're getting real work done. And, you get to some of the programs that are struggling, and I just think around the state, you look at Virginia Tech, and you get to those programs and they get into practice, and the 5 guys they're going against, they're not really pressing you the way you need to be pressed if you're going to be ready to win in the ACC. I thought UVA's team had that, and I thought Sam Hauser was a big reason. He's an all-conference kind of player coming out of Marquette, coming out of the Big East, had to sit this year, but he made them better in practice, and he will be a huge, huge part of next season. And it's one of the reasons that I think we have a hard time getting a handle of what next year will be. The front court, it kind of decimated, right? Mamadi's gone and Braxton Keith's gone. And what are you going to do without those guys? And, let's face it, it wasn't a great offensive team, and now you're taking away the leading scorer. But I just think it's going to be a very different team because I think that Sam Hauser is going to be a difference maker. I think he's going to be a number 1, 2 type scorer. It doesn't happen that often where a program at this level brings somebody in to play that bigger role, right? The smaller programs might grab a transfer and he becomes the star. He becomes the go-to guy, all that kind of stuff. The big-time programs, they usually grab that transfer to fill a role, to plug a need. They're not old enough. They want a veteran. They want somebody to bang in the front court. They need a better on-ball defender. It's something but here we've got a case where this has been one of the best programs in the nation for the last 5 years, and Sam Hauser is going to walk right in and be expected to be a huge part next year.
What I had trouble buying into Virginia, and we root for them, of course, it's just beautiful basketball, but what I struggled with here, Mike, was that their three-point shooting percentage was not great all year, and if you're going to play the style, they have the slowest adjusted tempo this past year per KenPom, and that's usually the area that they're in. But I felt it was really important for them to shoot threes at a high rate. And that's why their second half of the year was surprising to me. I mean, they ended up 311th in the country. They shot 30.3% as a team. But that's something that Hauser can absolutely help. He's a 40% shooter from three-point range. So the style's going to be there. You have some core players returning. And you now have a situation where you're adding a great three-point shooter, because if you look back to the year before in 2019, they were 39.5%. That was 8th in the country. So it really was amazing that they were able to score, generate points, and have this success while really not shooting three-pointers great as a team.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge credit. Yes, to Tony Bennett, certainly. He did a great job figuring out how to score enough to win, but it goes back to what I was saying about Kihei Clark, and he did it in a number of different ways, and you're right. This is an offense that's built on patience. You work the ball around, you find a great shot, and you take it. And things really fall apart for Virginia when you bring the ball up, work the ball around, be patient, find a great shot, and miss it, because now you're going the other way. It's a live ball situation. You can't get settled into that defense as well. So now you're playing a little more transition, and everything about Virginia is just a little less good when it's going that way, right? Everything's a little less sharp when they're not able to get back and get set. And that is why it was kind of miraculous. It's also miraculous that, when you look at Thomas Woda-Tensai and how hot he got, we talked about the Louisville game, but it really carried on down the stretch. He was brought in because he's a great three-point shooter. He was not very good for the first half of the year. And I don't know that I've been around a player that went from supposedly great to not very good to that consistently good down the stretch. And it added an element. And next year, if he's able to do that with Hauser, with Kihei bringing the ball up, and then depending on what you're going to get out of Jay Huff, then you factor in some of the young kids. I think they do have a real chance to be better offensively, and they're going to be good defensively.
Yeah, Woda-Tensai was a 3-star recruit. Casey Morsell was a 4-star recruit. And this year, so far, the commitments look very, very strong. We talked about Hauser. Jabri Abdul-Rahim, who's from out here in New Jersey, so we know him very well from Blair Academy. 4-star recruit, top 40 in the nation here, number 2 in the state. They have Reese Beekman coming in, who's a 4-star recruit from Louisiana. He's number 1 in the state. And Carson McCorkle, who's a 3-star recruit from North Carolina. So if you add in Hauser, I think this is one of the stronger recruiting classes, right, that Bennett's ever had.
Oh, absolutely. And it's one of the things that I remember, and this goes back a little bit, but I remember when they kind of blew the game against Syracuse with the Final Four on the line, the Elite Eight. We were in Chicago. And there was so much of, Tony Bennett's never going to win. Tony Bennett's never going to get it done. That style can't win in the tournament. All of that stuff that, since has been obviously disproven. But one of the things I thought was, hey, Tony Bennett, in where he is building this program, had gotten him to that point really without a recruiting class like this, really without that big-time recruiting class. And even when you think about the big three that led him to the championship, Jerome and Hunter were not even super high-level recruits. Kyle Guy was actually probably the highest recruit rated on the board, if I'm remembering right. All three were very good, but this is the first time he's really had a class where people are saying, wow, he's recruiting now the kind of players that you would think a team that wins a national title or there's always in the top 10. And that's going to change some of what they can do. It's not going to change the core beliefs. It's not going to change the way they focus on defense, but it's going to change the way they do things. And we saw that in the national title run. That offense, yeah, it was efficient, and everybody wants to talk about pace and efficiency, but it was pretty unstoppable too. I mean, those guys could get a bucket when they needed one with Jerome and Guy from the outside, Jerome's ability to drive, and Hunter being kind of that three different way kind of threat. So I think with more players like that coming into the program, you're going to see an evolution on the offensive side. Again, defense, we know what they are. You're going to see an evolution of what Tony Bennett wants this program to be.
Yeah, very high on this team next year. And yeah, that 2016 class, Guy, Jerome, Huff, Hunter were all 4-star recruits, all sort of 1, 2, 3 in the state. It's funny with Guy. Watching those free throws, Mike, last night, there is no chance in the world he was missing. He seemed so calm. He was smiling. You had Pearl call timeout for the third one. I mean, he's laughing. When you were watching that, I mean, you got to figure he's at least making 2 of 3. And folks, it was a foul. It was absolutely a foul where he took off and where he landed. Absolutely, it was a foul. But you had to feel pretty confident. Did you think he was going to make all 3? I knew he'd make 2, but the third one, not even hitting the rim at all.
I will say this. I thought they were going to win right there, to the point that I wrote that as my runner. As he stepped to the line for the first one, I wrote something about Kyle Guy sinking 3 free throws. And it's just because different kids, maybe I'd feel differently. And I've known, and I'm not going to dog anybody here, but I've sat courtside writing my story and somebody's got a chance to win it or tie it at the line. And I knew they weren't going to make it. And I started writing accordingly. But Kyle Guy in that situation, maybe it was caught up in the moment, right? Maybe it was so perfect for after everything they'd been through for him to do that, for the way Purdue ended too and everything. But I sat there fully believing he was going to hit all 3 and wrote accordingly. And obviously the rest, I guess you'd say, is history.
Yeah, and and I got to tell you, I was watching his face too last night. Again, quarantine here, Mike. This is what we're doing. But when he let that shot go, he thought it was good. Because the foul gets blown, he has no reaction, and then when he lands, he kind of makes a, ooh, with his face, because I think he thought he was getting an N1.
Yeah, he thinks that every time he shoots the ball, though. So him and Ty Jerome we used to laugh about, what's a good shot? When are you in range? And, Tony used to laugh. He said Ty thinks he's in range as soon as he crosses the half-court line. Kyle wasn't far off of that. And, there's a reason they were the kind of shooters they were, and it's confidence in their shot. And I really think that Kyle Guy enjoyed being on the line for those 3 shots. I don't think I would. Right? Like if you make them looking back, yeah, it's the greatest moment of your life. Right. But I don't know that in that moment, I think I'd be the butterfly guy. I think I'd have nerves, and I don't know that I would handle that situation. But, and I've covered guys who I don't think would handle that situation, but you could tell Kyle had that sort of like almost wry smile on his face. Yep. Like, oh, it's over. I'm going to draw this out and take my time. I'm going to bounce the ball and do the things you do when you shoot free throws, but this game is done and we're moving on. And, for UVA, just the right guy to have in that situation.
Well, Virginia basketball looks loaded again next year. Definitely going to be a preseason top 10 team, could even be higher. So we got to thank MikeBarber here for some great insight. He does a fantastic job covering UVA, does a great job out there, gives us a ton of inside information for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Again, must follow on Twitter at RTD_MikeBarber. Mike, thanks, man. We're here. We're trying to get our college basketball fix. It should have been the Sweet 16. We should be talking about like a 5-seed Virginia right now playing Kansas or something like that. Yeah. That's what should be going on tonight. But honestly, man, we appreciate a few minutes, and this is great. We're going to be looking for Virginia next year for sure.
Yeah, very happy to do it. Thanks for having me, and thanks for keeping the sports conversation going.
I'm addicted to the appetite. It's like a seed in the ground.